"Leave the vintage and vanish," the billionaire hissed, the words slicing through the hushed opulence of Ethelgard's dining room. He didn't snap his fingers. That would have been too common. Instead, Alistair Finch, the titan behind Finch Luxuries, simply made a dismissive gesture with his manicured hand, a motion one might use to brush away a speck of dust from a cashmere coat. The entire mezzanine, a private sanctuary for the city's financial deities, held its breath. Clara Sterling trembled, not from fear, but from a rage so pure and cold it threatened to shatter the crystal flute in her hand. For 3 years, she had perfected the art of invisibility, of becoming human furniture. She poured his 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild with a hand that had sketched the intricate escapement mechanisms of tourbillon watches since she was 10. He called her clumsy. He called her menial. He saw the server's uniform, the tired lines around her eyes from working 3 jobs, and saw nothing more. But when Finch's custom-built, iridium-cased satellite phone chirped, a direct, encrypted line to Shanghai that held the key to a $900 million acquisition that would either crown his empire or shatter it, he was the one who faltered. An explosive torrent of a specific, archaic Shanghainese dialect, one spoken only by the old-world masters of horology and jewelry, erupted from the speaker. Finch's face, usually a mask of smug control, turned the color of raw veal. He couldn't grasp a single crucial syllable. He never saw Clara pause in her task of clearing away the bread service. He never expected her to look not at the phone, but directly at him, her eyes burning with a sudden, terrifying clarity. And he certainly never, in his wildest, most arrogant nightmares, anticipated the 3 words she would utter in that same, flawless dialect. A phrase that would not just cost him a fortune, but resurrect a ghost he thought he had buried decades ago. Ethelgard's wasn't merely a restaurant, it was a stage. Perched on the 50th floor of a glass and steel spire that scraped the underbelly of Chicago's clouds, it was where reputations were forged over seared foie gras and destroyed over dessert. Its patrons didn't just eat, they consumed, they conquered, they conspired, and the staff were the silent, complicit stagehands. Clara adjusted the starched collar of her uniform, the cheap fabric chafing the delicate skin of her neck. Earlier that morning, in the cramped apartment she shared with her younger brother, Leo, she'd spent 20 minutes meticulously cleaning the gears of her grandfather's old watchmaking tools, their cool, familiar weight a comfort in her hands. Now, she checked her reflection in the polished brass of a wine chiller. The woman staring back was a ghost of herself, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights spent by Leo's hospital bed, but her spine was a rod of steel. At Ethelgard's, you served more than food. You served egos. You were meant to be an echo, a shadow, a silent witness to the casual cruelty of the powerful. Table 7 is Finch, the floor manager, a perpetually stressed man named Gerald, muttered as he thrust a wine list into her hands. "For God's sake, Sterling, don't breathe too loudly. He's closing the Chen deal tonight. If his water glass gets below the halfway mark, he'll have my hide, and I'll have yours." Clara's heart didn't drop. It solidified into a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Alistair Finch. The name was a curse whispered in the service industry, but for Clara, it was the sound of a gravestone being dragged across concrete. Finch, the CEO of Finch Luxuries, was a corporate vulture who specialized in acquiring small, family-owned artisan brands, gutting their heritage, and slapping their respected names onto mass-produced garbage. He was currently finalizing a merger with the Chen conglomerate, a Shanghai-based powerhouse known for its deep respect for traditional craftsmanship. The irony was so bitter it made Clara's teeth ache. The news had been plastered across every financial journal for months. If Finch secured the partnership, he would gain access to Chen's distribution network, legitimizing his hollowed-out brands on a global scale. If he failed, the mountain of debt he'd accrued to finance the hostile takeovers would finally crush him. "I'll be careful," Clara said, her voice a practiced whisper. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Leo's experimental treatment for his rare autoimmune disorder wasn't fully covered by insurance, and the bills were piling up like snowdrifts, silent and suffocating. She needed the tips from Table 7. She needed to survive the man who had destroyed her family. She moved onto the floor, the thick Aubusson carpet muffling the sound of her sensible, worn-out shoes. Table 7 was the pinnacle of Ethelgard's real estate, a semi-private alcove with a breathtaking view of the city lights glittering like a spilled chest of jewels. Alistair Finch sat flanked by two younger men in identical charcoal suits, their faces tight with anxiety. Finch himself was handsome in a predatory way, with silver-streaked hair, eyes the color of a winter sky, and a mouth that seemed incapable of forming a genuine smile. He was examining his own wristwatch, a gaudy, oversized Finch brand chronograph, as if it were a masterpiece. Clara knew, just by the way the light caught the bezel, that the movement inside was a cheap, factory-made piece of junk from Shenzhen. Her grandfather wouldn't have used it for a paperweight. She approached the table, her pulse a steady, controlled beat. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Clara. May I begin with some water for the table?" Finch didn't look up. "Still, from the Italian Alps, and if I taste a hint of municipal filtration, I will have you personally escorted to the city reservoir to explain your failure." He waved a hand, a flick of the wrist that said, "You are dismissed from my consciousness." Clara bowed her head, the familiar taste of swallowed pride coating her tongue. "Of course, Mr. Finch." As she turned away, his voice, laced with arrogant amusement, carried across the alcove. "The key to dealing with the Chinese boys is to understand they value the appearance of tradition more than tradition itself. Chen is a dinosaur. He talks of craftsmanship and legacy. We'll let him talk. We'll show him some shiny designs, sign the contracts, and within a year, we'll replace his master artisans with automated assembly lines. He thinks he's buying a partner. I'm buying a brand name to slap on my watches." Clara froze for a beat, her back to the table. It wasn't just the callousness that struck her. It was the profound, willful ignorance. Her grandmother, a formidable woman from Shanghai, had spent every Sunday of Clara's childhood teaching her not just the language, but the culture, the philosophy, the deep-seated reverence for Gongjiang Jingshen, the spirit of the craftsman. It was a concept as alien to Alistair Finch as humility. She hurried away, her hand steady as she retrieved the specific bottle of water, but inside, a long, dormant volcano was beginning to rumble. She knew something Finch didn't. She knew that a man who desecrates a craft doesn't understand its true power, and tonight he was about to get a master class. The meal was a meticulously orchestrated exercise in humiliation. Finch complained the consommé was cloudy, the lobster was overcooked by precisely 12 seconds, and the microgreens on his salad were arranged with a shocking lack of aesthetic consideration. Each criticism was delivered loudly, for the benefit of his sycophants, and for the singular purpose of making Clara feel small. At one point, he unclasped his ostentatious watch and placed it on the table. "Look at this," he said to his associates, but his eyes were on Clara as she refilled his water. Perfection. Heritage. Something a person like her, he gestured vaguely in her direction, could never comprehend. It's not just about telling time. It's about owning it. Clara's gaze flickered to the watch. She saw the misaligned indices, the poorly finished crown, the second hand that ticked instead of sweeping smoothly. It was a lie, packaged in polished steel. She thought of the locket around her neck, hidden beneath her uniform. It was the last piece her grandfather, Elias Sterling, had ever made. A miniature marvel of engineering, its gears finer than human hair, humming with a life of its own. Finch hadn't just bought her grandfather's company, Sterling & Sons Horology. He had devoured it, stolen its soul, and left her family with nothing but debt and a broken old man who died 6 months later. "Is everything to your satisfaction, sir?" Clara asked, her voice a marvel of placid neutrality. Finch ignored her, his attention now fixed on his satellite phone. "Where is the translator? It's 9 o'clock. Chen is calling in 5 minutes. One of the suits, a man named Harris, cleared his throat. "Sir, there was a multi-car pile-up on the Kennedy. The translator is stuck. He won't be here for at least an hour." Finch slammed his fist on the table. The water glasses jumped, and a woman at the next table gasped. Clara instinctively took a step back. "An hour!" Finch roared, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "An hour! Chen is calling to give his final approval on the intellectual property clauses. He does this verbally. If I miss this call, he'll see it as a sign of disrespect and walk. If I take it and can't understand his technical jargon, he'll think I'm a fool. Do you have any idea how much is at stake?" "I'm sorry, sir," Harris stammered. "Sorry doesn't restructure my debt," Finch snarled. He was losing his composure, the mask cracking. Chen insists on speaking his native dialect when discussing technical specifications. He calls it the language of the hands. It's loaded with antique Shanghainese idioms from the jewelry and watchmaking guilds of the 1930s. He does it to weed out the phonies. Clara, standing in the shadows by a service station, felt a jolt, like a current running through her. The language of the hands. Her grandmother had used that exact phrase. It was the language she had taught Clara, the words whispered over diagrams of gear trains and mainsprings. It was the language of her heritage, the language of her grandfather's ghost. Finch's phone began to ring, a shrill, demanding tone. The screen lit up with 2 characters, Chen Xiansheng, Mr. Chen. Finch stared at the device as if it were a cobra. "Damn it! Put it on speaker. I'll try to wing it. Maybe his English is better than they said." He tapped the screen. "Mr. Chen, a pleasure to hear your voice." A man's voice, sharp and aged, crackled from the speaker. It was rapid, precise, and utterly devoid of English. "分析先生，你的诚意在哪里？我的团队说，你的专利文件里，亲中论的描述含糊不清。Mr. Finch, where is your sincerity? My team says the description of the escapement wheel in your patent documents is ambiguous." Finch's smile was a ghastly, frozen thing. "Ah, Mr. Chen. Yes, the patents. Excellent patents. We are very proud of them." The voice on the other end sharpened, the dialect becoming denser, more technical. It was a verbal stress test. 不要跟我耍花招。如果有丝的振动频率与悖论不匹配，这整个项目就是个空壳。你以为我是傻瓜吗？ Don't play games with me. If the hairspring's vibration frequency doesn't match the balance wheel, this entire project is an empty shell. Do you take me for a fool? What did he say about a shell? Finch hissed at his associates. Is he backing out? I think he's unhappy, sir, the other suit offered weakly. I know he's unhappy, you imbecile, Finch snapped. He leaned toward the phone. Mr. Chen, the connection is poor. Could you repeat that? Mr. Chen launched into a complex explanation of proprietary alloy compositions for the balance spring, using metaphors about the resilience of bamboo and the spirit of the patient craftsman. To Finch, it was gibberish. He was drowning in a sea of sounds he couldn't comprehend, about to lose $1 billion lifeline because of a traffic jam. Finch muted the microphone, his face slick with sweat. Find someone. Anyone in this restaurant who speaks Mandarin. I don't care who. A busboy, a dishwasher. I'll give them $20,000. Go, now. The two suits practically fell over each other getting up, their eyes scanning the room of wealthy, predominantly white diners. $20,000. The number echoed in Clara's mind. It would cover Leo's treatments for the next 6 months. It was a lifeline. It was a path out of the suffocating darkness of debt. But it meant helping Alistair Finch, the man who had mocked her, humiliated her, and built his empire on the ashes of her family's legacy. She looked at his desperate, pathetic face. Then she looked at the phone, where a master of his craft was being played for a fool. She took one deliberate step out of the shadows. "I can do it," Clara said. Her voice was quiet, but it sliced through the panic at the table like a diamond cutter through glass. Finch's head whipped around. His wild eyes took in her server's uniform, the pen tucked behind her ear, the faint sheen of exhaustion on her forehead. He let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "You?" he sneered. "The waitress? What are you going to do? Offer him a wine pairing? Get back to your station." "I speak Mandarin, Mr. Finch," Clara stated, her voice gaining a cold, hard edge. "And I understand the old Shanghainese horological dialect. He's not just talking about the parts. He's questioning the integrity of your entire design philosophy. He believes your hairspring and balance wheel are fundamentally incompatible, creating what he calls an empty shell, a watch that looks good, but has no soul." Finch stopped laughing. He stared at her, the blood draining from his face. The phone was still emitting the stream of angry, technical Mandarin. "You understood that?" he whispered. "He just said," Clara continued calmly, "that if you cannot explain the metallurgical synergy in the next 10 seconds, he is terminating the negotiations and calling our competitor Beolong Industries." Finch's face went from pale to ashen. Beolong was his greatest rival. The mention of their name was a kill shot. He shoved the satellite phone across the table toward her, his arrogance dissolving into raw, desperate greed. "Talk. Fix this. Save this deal and the 20 grand is yours. Do it!" Clara calmly placed her silver serving tray on an adjacent table. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a single, transformative second. In that moment, she wasn't Clara the waitress. She was Clara Sterling, granddaughter of Elias Sterling, the girl who had spent her childhood at a watchmaker's bench, learning a language of gears and springs, of patience and precision. She leaned over the phone. "Chen 先生, 请您息怒. 我是分期先生的助理," she began. "Mr. Chen, please calm your anger. I am Mr. Finch's assistant." Her voice was different. Gone was the subservient whisper of a server. In its place was a voice of quiet authority, resonant and clear, imbued with the unmistakable accent of old Shanghai. 关于有四和百论的协同作用，我们的设计是基于 Regarding the synergy of the hairspring and balance wheel, our design is based on... There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, a single, curious grunt. 你的口音,你是上海人? Your accent. Are you from Shanghai? 我的外祖母是, Clara replied smoothly, not missing a beat. 她叫我沉默的齿轮转动最久. My maternal grandmother was. She taught me the silent gear turns the longest. For the next 15 minutes, the opulent dining room of Ethelgard's ceased to exist. Clara was a bridge between two worlds. She translated Chen's intricate, poetic concerns about craftsmanship into blunt, actionable business terms for Finch. She took Finch's panicked, greedy counteroffers and rephrased them in the respectful, nuanced language of a fellow artisan. She didn't just translate words, she translated intent, culture, and respect. She spoke of tolerances and talk, not in cold, clinical terms, but with the passion of someone who understood the soul of a machine. Finch watched, his mouth agape. He saw the transformation, the way she stood, her posture now radiating confidence, the way her hands moved, not to clear plates, but to emphasize a technical point that Mr. Chen, on the other side of the world, could not see, but could surely feel in the authority of her voice. This wasn't a waitress. This was a commander. Finally, Mr. Chen's voice on the phone softened, losing its aggressive edge. 很好, he said. 条款可以接受。芬奇先生，你很幸运，有这样一位能干的助理。我们明天签约。Very good. The terms are acceptable. Mr. Finch, you are very lucky to have such a capable assistant. We will sign tomorrow. The line went dead. The silence that descended upon Table 7 was absolute. Finch's two associates were staring at Clara as if she had just sprouted wings. Finch himself sagged back into his chair, letting out a long, shuddering breath. He ran a hand over his face, wiping away the sweat. He had been pulled from the abyss. The deal was saved. He looked at Clara. The relief in his eyes was swiftly being replaced by his old, familiar arrogance. He had won. He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke jacket, pulled out a slim, gold-plated checkbook, and scribbled furiously. He tore out the check and slid it across the table. It stopped near a bread plate. 20,000, Finch said, his smug sneer returning. You're full of surprises. I suppose they teach all sorts of useful things in night school these days. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. You can go now, he added, waving his hand again. And send over a bottle of the 59 Dom Perignon. We have a deal to celebrate. Clara looked at the check. Then she looked at the man who had written it. He hadn't learned a single thing. He thought he had bought her skill, her voice, her heritage, for $20,000. But then, the phone rang again. Finch frowned. It's Chen. What now? Did he forget something? He tapped the speakerphone button. Mr. Chen, good to hear from you again. The voice that came through was not the same. It was no longer speaking Mandarin. It was speaking slow, deliberate, and chillingly clear English. Mr. Finch, Chen said, my curiosity was piqued by your assistant. Her dialect was too perfect, too authentic. So I had my people do a quick search. The name of the last true master watchmaker in America who spoke that dialect was Elias Sterling. Finch's brow furrowed in confusion. He glanced at Clara. She's just a waitress, Chen. A temp. What does some old dead watchmaker have to do with anything? Everything. Chen's voice boomed, cold as steel. Elias Sterling was the founder of Sterling & Sons Horology, a company you acquired in a hostile takeover 30 years ago, a company whose designs you have been stealing and passing off as your own ever since. A man who died bankrupt and disgraced, claiming you framed him. A beat of silence. Ask her, Mr. Finch. Ask your assistant to translate one last thing for me. A message for you. Finch stared at Clara, his face a mask of dawning horror. What is he talking about? What message? Clara didn't reach for the phone. She stood straight, her hands clasped behind her back. She looked Alistair Finch directly in the eye, and for the first time that night, she let 30 years of inherited pain and righteous fury surface. The fear was gone. The subservience was a pile of ash at her feet. She spoke 3 words in Mandarin, softly, clearly, lethally. Tashasita Lin. Tashi este Lin. Finch blinked. What? What does that mean? Translate it. Clara allowed herself a small, cold smile. It doesn't mean he. It means she. It means she is a sterling. Finch's blood turned to ice water in his veins. He recoiled as if she had physically struck him. Mr. Chen, Clara said, leaning toward the phone, her voice now ringing with clarity in English for the whole table to hear. Before you called, Mr. Finch was explaining to his associates his plan to gut your workshops and replace your master artisans with assembly lines within a year. He called you a dinosaur. He said he was buying your name, not your partnership. You lying little witch! Finch shrieked, lunging across the table for the phone. I am a man who values craftsmanship, Finch! Chen's voice thundered from the speaker, cutting through Finch's screeching. I record all preliminary negotiations for quality control. I have the entire conversation. Your insults, your laughter, your contemptible plan. The deal is off. I do not do business with grave robbers. A pause. And Mr. Finch? Yes, Finch whispered, frozen. The woman standing before you. You did not just underestimate a waitress. You insulted the legacy of a master. You have made an enemy of the wrong family. Goodbye. The line clicked dead. Finch sat, paralyzed for a long moment. His $900 million salvation had vanished. His empire was teetering on the brink of collapse, and it was all her fault. He rose slowly from his chair, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He loomed over her, his fists clenched at his sides. Do you have any idea what you've just done? He seethed. You little gutter rat, I will ruin you. I will sue you into oblivion. I will make sure you never work in this city again, not even as a dishwasher. Who in God's name do you think you are? Clara reached out and picked up the $20,000 check. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger, looked him dead in the eye, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she ripped it in 2, then 4. She let the pieces flutter from her fingers into his half-full glass of vintage wine. You asked me who I am, she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. My name is Clara Sterling. She reached up, unclasped the chain around her neck, and pulled out her grandfather's locket. She placed it gently on the table beside the ruined check. And I am here to collect a 30-year-old debt. She unbuttoned her server's jacket, folded it neatly, and placed it on the back of a chair. I quit. The silence that followed Clara's exit was not empty. It was thick and heavy, charged with the ozone of an impending storm. Alistair Finch did not erupt. He imploded. He sat rigidly in his chair, his gaze fixed on the pieces of his own check dissolving in a $5,000 bottle of wine. The ink bled, turning the pale gold liquid a murky grey. Security, Finch whispered, the words barely audible, yet carrying the chilling weight of absolute command. Lock down the building. She doesn't get out. But Clara had anticipated him. She didn't go to the locker room. She didn't take the main elevators. She slipped into the service corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs, not with fear, but with a wild, terrifying exhilaration. She took the freight elevator down 50 floors, the rattling descent, a counterpoint to the roaring in her ears. She burst out of a rear exit into a grimy alley, the biting Chicago wind a welcome shock to her system. She ran. She ran without a destination, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon and gold until her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead. She finally stumbled to a halt in a small, deserted park overlooking Lake Michigan, collapsing onto a cold iron bench. The adrenaline began to recede, and the crushing reality of her actions washed over her. She had publicly detonated the life of one of the most vindictive men in Chicago. She had cost him nearly $1 billion and, worse, his pride. She had declared war, armed with nothing but the truth and a locket. "Stupid," she whispered to the dark, churning water of the lake. "So stupid." Her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was an automated text from the hospital pharmacy. Reminder: Leo Sterling's prescription copay of $800 is due for pickup. Clara stared at the message, the glowing screen illuminating the tears welling in her eyes. She had just torn up $20,000. She had just abandoned the one job that provided any semblance of health insurance. The truth didn't pay for immunosuppressants. Justice didn't cover hospital bills. When Clara finally made it back to their small apartment, it was past 2 a.m. She found Leo awake, sitting at the small kitchen table, a textbook open in front of him, though his eyes were heavy with fatigue. He was a frail but fiercely intelligent 17-year-old, determined to study engineering despite the constant interruptions of his illness. "You're late," he said, his voice raspy. He looked at her disheveled state, the missing server's jacket, the feverish glint in her eyes. "Clara." What happened? She sank into the chair opposite him and told him everything. The insults, the archaic dialect, the phone call, the ripped check, the name she had finally reclaimed. Leo listened, his expression shifting from concern to disbelief, and finally to a slow-burning pride. When she finished, she expected him to worry, to ask about the money, about his medicine. Instead, he reached across the table and took her hand. His was cool and dry. "Grandpa Elias would have been so proud," he whispered. "He always said a Sterling never bows to a bully." "But the money, Leo," she choked out. "Your medicine. Finch. He's not going to just let this go." "Let him come," Leo said, his grip tightening on her hand, his eyes holding a strength that belied his physical fragility. "He took our name. He took our company. He took our grandfather. What else is left for him to take? A man like that, Clara, he thinks in terms of assets and liabilities. You just turned yourself from a zero into a liability he can't control. That doesn't just make you dangerous. It makes you unpredictable." Leo was right. Finch's retaliation was not just swift. It was brutally efficient. It began at dawn with a thunderous knock on the door. Not a process server, but 2 burly men from the landlord's office. They presented her with an emergency eviction notice. An anonymous tip had led to a sudden inspection that revealed critical structural instabilities. They had 24 hours to vacate. It was a lie, but a legally airtight one. By noon, her bank account was frozen. A preliminary injunction, filed by Finch's legal team, claimed she was a flight risk in a corporate espionage case they were building. The charge was ludicrous, premeditated sabotage of a merger, but it was enough to cut off her access to the little money she had. By evening, she received calls from the other 2 places she worked, a morning barista gig and a weekend job cataloguing books for a rare book dealer. Both fired her. They were deeply apologetic. They'd received calls from a powerful man's lawyer, strongly advising them to sever ties with a known corporate saboteur. Finch wasn't just suing her. He was systematically erasing her from the city. He was making her homeless, penniless, and unemployable. He was building a narrative where any accusation she might make about her grandfather would sound like the desperate fantasy of a disgraced criminal. Clara packed their few belongings into cardboard boxes, her movements numb and mechanical. She looked at Leo, who was carefully wrapping their grandfather's watchmaking tools in soft cloths. "He wants to bury us," she whispered. "Okay, Alistair. You want to see what a sterling can do when backed into a corner? Let's dig." Clara moved them into a weekly rate motel near the airport, a soulless place that smelled of stale smoke and despair. She paid for the first week in cash, using the emergency money she kept hidden in an old copy of Moby Dick. She knew a legal battle was impossible. Finch had an army of lawyers who could bleed her dry with motions and filings for years. She had to fight him on a different battlefield, the past. She retrieved the one thing she had saved from her grandfather's workshop before the bank seized it, his old, leather-bound master ledger. It was a heavy tome, filled not with numbers, but with Elias Sterling's elegant script and intricate technical drawings. For 30 years, Finch's story had been that Elias was a brilliant but reckless artist who drove his own company into the ground, forcing Finch to step in as a reluctant savior. The ledger told a different story. Clara spent the next 2 days hunched over the book, a magnifying glass in one hand, a notebook in the other. The pages were filled with designs, formulas for metal alloys, and notes on suppliers. But interspersed were journal entries, written in a mix of English and the Shanghainese dialect her grandmother had spoken. It was her grandfather's private record. She read for hours, her eyes gritty with exhaustion, until she found it. An entry dated a month before Finch's takeover. "Alistair is pressuring me to use cheaper Swiss movements. He speaks of market realities. I speak of integrity. He doesn't understand. The soul of the watch is the movement. To replace our in-house caliber is to sell our name for profit. He brought in a new accountant today, a man named Gavin Thorne. There is something slick about him. He keeps talking about creative accounting to attract investors. I don't like it. I recorded our last meeting. He doesn't know. The micro-recorder is hidden inside the prototype for the Celestial. He called the design unmarketable. I think it is my masterpiece." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The Celestial. She remembered the stories. Her grandfather's final, most ambitious project. A watch that was also a miniature, perfectly accurate planetarium. Finch had dismissed it as a folly and supposedly scrapped the prototype. If that watch still existed, and if the recorder was still inside. Her train of thought was shattered by a sharp knock on the motel room door. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed a heavy glass lamp, her knuckles white. "Who is it?" "A messenger from Mr. Chen," a calm, professional voice replied. Clara hesitated, then slowly opened the door. A slender, middle-aged Chinese man in a perfectly tailored suit stood in the hallway. He carried a slim briefcase. He was not threatening. He radiated an aura of quiet competence. "Miss Sterling," he said with a slight bow, "my name is Liu. Mr. Chen sends his profound respect and his apologies for your current circumstances." He stepped inside, his eyes taking in the grim surroundings without judgment. "Mr. Chen has been following the news of Mr. Finch's legal assault against you," Liu continued. "He is a man who believes that a lie, left unchallenged, becomes a kind of truth. He finds this unacceptable." "Is he going to help?" Clara asked, her voice raw. "He is going to provide an opportunity," Liu corrected gently. He placed the briefcase on the flimsy motel desk and opened it. It contained a laptop, a satellite phone, and a single, pristine credit card. Mr. Chen has learned that Alistair Finch is hosting his annual Legacy Gala in 3 days. It is a nauseating spectacle where he showcases his finest timepieces to his wealthiest clients. This year, to save face after our deal collapsed, he will be unveiling a newly discovered heritage piece, a one-of-a-kind masterpiece from the golden age of his brand. "The Celestial," Clara whispered, understanding dawning. Liu nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "Precisely. He is going to present your grandfather's masterpiece as his own discovery, a symbol of the Finch brand's deep history. He will likely sell it at auction that night for millions, cementing the lie forever." "I have to stop him," Clara said, her resolve hardening. "I have to get that watch." "Getting in will be impossible for you," Liu said. "Security will be absolute, but Mr. Chen has secured you an invitation." He slid a heavy embossed card across the desk. "You will be attending as the personal guest of the Chen conglomerate's new acquisitions consultant." However, Liu's voice became serious. "Mr. Chen cannot intervene directly. To do so would be to start a corporate war he is not yet prepared for. He can open the door for you. What you do once you are inside is up to you. He is investing in you, Miss Sterling, not in a legal battle. Do you have the proof you need?" Clara looked at her grandfather's ledger, then at the invitation. This wasn't just a chance for justice. It was a test. "Mr. Liu," she said, her mind racing. "I need two things. First, I need the original building plans for the Finch Luxuries headquarters from 1985. Second, I need you to get a message to a man named Gavin Thorne. Tell him a ghost from Sterling and Sons wants to talk." The Finch Luxuries Legacy Gala was the epitome of manufactured history. Held in the grand, marble-floored atrium of the Finch Tower, it was a symphony of champagne fountains, string quartets, and air thick with expensive perfume and self-congratulation. The city's elite drifted through the room, admiring display cases of watches that Clara knew were soulless shells. Clara moved through the crowd, a ghost in a simple, elegant black dress provided by Liu. She was invisible again, but this time by choice. She ignored the Guel. The maelstrom that erupted in the Finch Tower atrium was not one of sound, but of stolen breaths and shattered illusions. For a moment, as the glowing blue script of her grandfather's indictment hung in the air, there was a vacuum, a perfect, crystalline silence, where a $900 million lie had just died. Then came the deluge, the frantic clicking of smartphone cameras, the rising tide of whispers, the sharp, authoritative voices of the detectives cutting through the chaos. Clara stood on the stage, the Celestial, a cool, heavy weight in her palm, its intricate life a stark contrast to the implosion of the man before her. Alistair Finch didn't crumble. He froze. His face, a moment ago a mask of theatrical indignation, became a canvas of pure, uncomprehending shock. He stared at the glowing ledger, then at the police, then at her. The gears in his mind, always spinning, always calculating, had seized. This was an outcome that had never existed in his universe of possibilities. Security guards, moments ago poised to drag her away, now stood awkwardly, their purpose nullified by a higher authority. As the detective placed a hand on Finch's arm, the spell broke. A guttural, animalistic roar tore from his throat. It was not a sound of anger, but of a king being dragged from his throne. "This is a setup, a fabrication. She's a nobody, a plant from a competitor," he bellowed, his eyes scanning the crowd of his peers, his clients, his victims, begging them to believe the fiction he had maintained for 3 decades. But their faces reflected only a cold, calculating reassessment. They were not his friends. They were predators who smelled blood in the water. They saw a liability, a bad investment, a falling star. "You!" he finally spat, his gaze locking onto Clara's, the venom in his voice so potent it felt like a physical blow. "You're just a waitress." The words, once meant to diminish her, now sounded pathetic. the last desperate curse of a dying god. Clara met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. She felt no triumph, no surge of righteous victory. There was only a profound, hollow emptiness, the quiet that follows a detonation. The ghost she had carried for so long had finally been laid to rest, and in its place was just silence. As they led him away in gleaming silver cuffs, a stark accessory against his bespoke suit, his eyes never left hers. They promised ruin. They promised a war that was only just beginning. Clara was escorted not to a jail cell, but to a quiet, sterile office deep within the tower. The detective, a weary-looking man named Miller, offered her a cup of lukewarm coffee in a styrofoam cup. It tasted like ash. For hours under the flat, fluorescent lights, she recounted the story, not with passion, but with the meticulous precision of a watchmaker assembling a movement. She laid out the pieces, the ledger, the recording, Thorne's prearranged testimony, the cultural nuances of the Shanghainese dialect. It was a 30-year history compressed into a single, devastating narrative. When she finally emerged from the tower in the pre-dawn hours, the world had changed. A pack of journalists and camera crews swarmed her, their questions a barrage of noise, their flashes a blinding, disorienting assault. "Miss Sterling, is it true Finch stole your family's legacy? How did you uncover the fraud? Are you suing the estate?" Mr. Liu materialized beside her, a silent, calming presence. He guided her through the throng to a waiting black car, shielding her from the worst of the onslaught. As the car pulled away, Clara looked back at the Finch Tower, its spire a dark spear against the bruised purple of the dawn sky. She had stormed the castle and slain the dragon. She had never felt less like a hero. The days that followed were not a victory lap. They were a trench war. Finch, out on a bail so high it was an obscenity, unleashed the full might of his legal army. They didn't just defend him, they attacked her. A smear campaign of breathtaking viciousness began. Tabloids ran stories painting her as a disgruntled, mentally unstable employee, a corporate spy hired by Beolong Industries. They dug into her past, twisting her 3 jobs into evidence of financial desperation, her brother's illness into a motive for extortion. They claimed the recording was a deep fake, the ledger a forgery, Thorne a coerced and unreliable witness. Finch was fighting not for his freedom, but for his name. He was trying to poison the narrative so thoroughly that even if he lost in court, he would win in the court of public opinion, recasting himself as the victim of an elaborate conspiracy. Clara and Leo were moved into a secure, furnished apartment paid for by Mr. Chen. It was clean, spacious, and felt as alien as a moon base. The world outside their windows was a hostile territory. Every news alert, every ringing phone, was a potential new assault. Clara stopped sleeping. She would sit in the dark, the celestial on the table before her, listening to the quiet hum of its movement, a sound that was both a comfort and an accusation. She had won justice for her grandfather, but in doing so, she had plunged her own life and Leo's into a public, brutal war. "He's trying to make you invisible again," Leo said one evening, finding her staring out at the city lights. His treatments were working, the color returning to his cheeks, the strength to his voice. The scholarship to MIT was a real, tangible future waiting for him, but he saw the toll this was taking on his sister. "He's throwing so much mud, he hopes people will stop seeing the person underneath." "Maybe there's nothing to see," Clara whispered, her voice raw with exhaustion. "I spent so long being his shadow, and now I'm just his opponent. I'm defined by him, Leo. First by what he took, now by what I'm fighting. Who am I without Alistair Finch?" "You're the woman who remembered," Leo said, his voice firm. He picked up one of their grandfather's tools from the box they'd brought with them, a delicate pair of brass tweezers. "Grandpa didn't just teach you about gears and springs, Clara. He taught you about patience, about precision, about how the smallest, most overlooked part can be the one that holds the entire mechanism together. Finch sees the world as a sledgehammer. You see it as an escapement wheel. Let him rage. You just need to find the one precise point of pressure that makes his entire mainspring unwind." His words were a lifeline. She wasn't just a fighter. She was a builder, a problem solver. Finch's strategy was chaos. Hers had to be precision. The turning point came not in a courtroom, but in a quiet meeting with Mr. Chen, who had flown in from Shanghai. They met in a private room at a discreet tea house. He didn't offer condolences or congratulations. He simply poured the tea with a steady hand, the aroma of oolong filling the silence. "Alistair Finch is a creature of perception," Chen said, his English thoughtful and exact. "He built an empire on a stolen name. His power is not in his assets, which are now frozen, but in the illusion of his legacy. His lawyers are not fighting facts. They are fighting to preserve this illusion." "How do I fight an illusion?" Clara asked. "You do not," Chen replied, placing a cup before her. "You build something real, something so undeniable in its truth and craftsmanship that it makes his illusion look like the cheap imitation it is." He slid a thick portfolio across the table. "The bankruptcy courts are liquidating Finch Luxuries. The assets are being sold for scrap. The brand name is worthless, toxic. But the physical properties, the original workshop your grandfather built, the machinery, the archives he tried to bury, they are available. I can acquire them." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Why would you do that?" "Because I am not a banker, Miss Sterling. I am a craftsman," Chen said, his gaze intense. "That night at Ethelgard's, you did not just speak a language. You spoke of the Gongjiang Jingshen, the spirit of the artisan. You defended it. That spirit has value beyond any stock price. I will not hand you a resurrected company. That would be Finch's way. I will give you the keys to a tomb. I will provide the capital to excavate it. But you, Clara Sterling, must be the one to bring the ghost back to life. Create one timepiece. Just one. One that holds the soul of your grandfather and the strength of your own hands. Make something real in a world of his lies." It was an impossible challenge, and it was the only thing that made sense. The workshop was worse than she could have imagined. Dust lay in thick, felt-like blankets over everything. The lathes were rusted, the delicate tools thrown into greasy boxes. Finch had not just shuttered the place, he had desecrated it, leaving it to rot as the final insult. For the first week, Clara did nothing but clean. She swept, she scrubbed, she oiled. She worked until her muscles ached and her hands were raw, exorcising the lingering taint of his neglect. Leo, on a break from his preliminary online courses, worked alongside her, meticulously cleaning and cataloguing every tiny tool, every schematic, every screw. In a locked cabinet in the back, they found it, her grandfather's personal workbench, exactly as he had left it. A half-finished movement was still held in a vise. A pair of spectacles rested beside a worn, leather-bound book. It was not the master ledger. It was a book of poetry. Rilke. It was a sanctuary, a time capsule of the man, not the legend. And on that bench, Clara began. She didn't try to recreate the celestial. That was her grandfather's masterpiece, a monument to his genius. She needed to create her own. She started with a design she found sketched in the margins of the poetry book, A simple, elegant watch with a unique complication. A true moon phase, one that would be accurate for 122 years, based on an escapement design Elias had never perfected. He had called it the persistence of memory. The work was brutal. It was a language she knew, but she was out of practice. Her hands, softened by years of service work, had to relearn their old dexterity. She spent 16-hour days hunched over the bench, a loop screwed into her eye, filing gears by hand to tolerances of 1,000th of a millimeter. She failed repeatedly. Springs snapped, gears misaligned. The frustration was a physical pain. During this time, the legal battle raged on, a distant, grinding noise. Finch's trial date was set. Thorne's testimony was holding firm. The tide of public opinion, swayed by Finch's PR machine, was a murky, uncertain thing. Clara ignored it all. Her entire world had shrunk to the 4 square feet of her workbench. She was not fighting Finch anymore. She was wrestling with her grandfather's ghost, with the crushing weight of his legacy. One night, close to midnight, after a critical gear had stripped for the 3rd time, she finally broke. She swept a box of components onto the floor, the tiny metal parts scattering like lost stars. She sank onto a stool, burying her face in her hands, the metallic smell of oil and failure filling her senses. "I can't do it, Leo," she sobbed when he came to stand beside her. "I'm not him. I'm a waitress who got lucky. This is all a fraud. I'm as much of a fraud as Finch." Leo didn't say anything. He simply knelt and began picking up the tiny scattered pieces one by one. After a long silence, he spoke. "You're right. You're not him. Grandpa was a genius. He was a master. But he lost, Clara." She looked up, startled. "What are you talking about?" "He lost," Leo repeated, his voice gentle but unyielding. "He was a brilliant artist who couldn't or wouldn't fight the monster at his door. He retreated into his work and let the world burn around him. You walked into the fire. You fought. This," he gestured to the workshop, to the watch components in his hand. "This isn't about being him. It's about finishing the fight he couldn't. His legacy isn't just making perfect watches. It's having the strength to protect them. You have that strength. He didn't." His words struck her with the force of revelation. She had been trying to be a perfect copy of her grandfather, to live up to his shadow. But Leo was right. Her strength was not his. His was in creation. Hers was in resilience. She wasn't just his heir. She was his avenger, his vindicator. She was something new. She took a deep breath, the air clearing in her lungs and in her mind. She picked up the stripped gear. She wasn't just fixing a part. She was forging her own identity. 6 months later, on the day Alistair Finch was sentenced, Clara put the final touch on the persistence of memory. The trial had been a media circus, but the evidence was irrefutable. The jury found him guilty on all counts. The judge, citing the decades-long, malicious nature of the fraud, sentenced him to 20 years in federal prison. In the end, his name was his only remaining asset, and it was now synonymous with disgrace. There was a brief, blurry photo of him in the papers, no longer in a bespoke suit, but in an ill-fitting blazer, his face not hateful, but shockingly empty. He was no longer a king. He was just a man, an old, defeated man. Clara did not attend the sentencing. That evening, Mr. Chen came to the workshop. It was no longer a tomb. It was alive. The lights were warm. The machines hummed softly, and 2 other old watchmakers, men Clara had coaxed out of retirement, were working quietly at their own benches. It smelled of oil, metal, and creation. Clara said nothing. She simply placed the finished watch on a piece of clean, black velvet on her grandfather's bench. It was beautiful. Its steel case was polished to a mirror shine, its face a deep, star-flecked blue. The true moon complication, a tiny hand-engraved silver disc, glowed with a soft luminescence. It was a piece of quiet, defiant art. Mr. Chen picked it up, his expert eyes missing nothing. He examined the movement through his loupe, the flawless finish on the gears, the steady, rhythmic beat of the escapement she had perfected. He was silent for a full minute. "Your grandfather's work was the poetry of a genius," he said at last, his voice thick with emotion. This is the prose of a survivor. It is stronger. It has a different kind of soul." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not a benefactor, but a peer. The sterling promise is restored. He gestured to the celestial, which sat under a small glass dome on the corner of the bench. "What will you do with this one? It is a piece of history, a museum piece." Clara looked at the watch that had started it all. It was a masterpiece, but it was also a weapon, a vessel of pain and memory. Her victory was not in possessing it. Her victory was in no longer needing it. "A watch isn't meant for a museum," she said softly. "It's meant to keep time." 1 year to the day after the gala, Clara walked into a small, unassuming pawn shop in one of Chicago's older, quieter neighborhoods. The old man behind the counter looked up over his spectacles. "Help you?" "I'm looking for a watch," Clara said. "For my brother. He's starting his first year of university. Something reliable. Something with character." The pawnbroker brought out a tray of second-hand timepieces. Most were unremarkable. But in the corner lay an old Sterling & Sons watch from the 1970s. It was one of her grandfather's pre-Finch designs. Simple, elegant, its case scratched from a lifetime of use. Its soul was intact. As she was paying for it, she saw a television flickering in the corner of the shop. A financial news report. They were showing a retrospective on the 1-year anniversary of the Finch Luxuries collapse. They showed a photo of Alastair Finch looking regal and powerful, then a photo of her looking tired and defiant on the steps of the courthouse. The anchor's voice droned on about legacy, fraud, and the spectacular fall from grace. Clara watched for a moment, a complete stranger to the drama on the screen. The woman in that photo felt like someone else, from another lifetime. The rage was gone. The emptiness was gone. She took the old watch, its familiar weight a comfort in her hand. She walked out of the pawn shop and into the bright, cold Chicago afternoon. She didn't look back. She had a future to build, one tiny, perfect, patiently placed gear at a time, her own.